welcome back to the live series Roundtable events. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, but I wanted to bring it back, connect some engineering leaders and have a good discussion on a topic which Jen has come up with us for today, which is how to retain your best technical talent. So what I'll briefly do is I'll just go around the event, give everyone a brief introduction, and then what we'll do is just dive straight into the conversation and take it from there. So first up, we've got Simon Wood, who's the Director of Engineering over at Holiday Extras, who are quite an established technology business which provide an all-in-one holiday booking platform. How are you today, Simon?
I'm good, thank you. Very good.
Good, glad to hear. Brilliant. We've also got Jen, who is an engineering manager over at ASOS, who I'm sure most people will know, but in case you've been living under a rock, they're a huge online e-commerce business in modern fashion. How are you, Jen?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Brilliant, good to hear. Next up, we've got John. John's the CTO over at Verisart. Verisart are a startup business and they specialise in helping NFT creators to sell their creations a lot more easily. How are you, John?
Very good, thank you.
Good, glad to hear. And last but definitely not least, we've got Min, who's head of product and technology over at GetHarley, whose tech platform is designed to help everyone get a better dermatology service. How are you, Min?
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Amazing. No problem at all. Thanks for coming. So I think the best way to really sort of start off and just to give everyone like an idea, if we go around and everyone just gives a brief overview of what their role is at the moment, how many people are in their team, how that's sort of split up in terms of engineers and the wider product team. So I guess, Simon, if we come back to you and start with yourself, if you could just give us a run through and we'll take it from there.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, Holiday Extras is quite a large business for about 600, 650 people, but the tech and product team is about 120. It was a little bit larger pre-pandemic and we're rebuilding, you know, like everyone, we've had attrition challenges. But yeah, that sort of 120 is made up broadly of probably 2/3 of the team are software engineers, front engineers, back-end engineers, infrastructure engineers, data engineers, and then there's lots of other supporting roles around that as well, product managers, agile coaches, delivery managers, QAs, etc. But yeah, that's the broad size and shape of the team, sort of working as everyone does, sort of modern agile practices, working in squads.
Brilliant, perfect. Thanks a lot for that. Jen, we can come to you next. What's your team structure like over at ASOS?
So we're a bit bigger in terms of our tech. So we're about 1,200 people across all of tech. Me specifically, I'm the engineering manager for the AI and data science platform. So we are growing quite quickly. So if I tell you a number, it's totally going to be out of date by about tomorrow because just about 20 interviews put into my diary. But we've got machine learning engineers, machine learning scientists, data scientists, big data engineers, engineering managers, head of tech, all that is across just sort of our platform. And then beyond that, we've got obviously software engineers, platform engineers, QAs, etc. So nice and busy, and obviously doing the modern practices of agile and that type of thing.
Perfect. All right, brilliant. John, we can come to you next. What's your team like at Verisart currently?
Yeah, so we're definitely in the middle of the everyone here. So our whole company is only 10 people, and there's 5 in our product team. So we kind of combine engineers and our CPO and designers and QA all in one kind of amalgamated team. So yeah, we're quite small. I'm the CTO.
Perfect. And last but not least, Min, what's the team like at GetHarley currently?
Yes, so the product and tech team, so similar to John, we've combined it, and overall companies about 50 people now, grown really massively over the last year. The product and tech team really only founded last March when I joined the team, so we've grown from just me to 6 people in-house in the past year. And it's a mix of engineers and a data analyst today.
Perfect. All right, brilliant. So I think the first sort of point I wanted to cover today is just sort of the basics of what our topic is, so how to retain your best technical talent. Obviously, what happens when you don't retain your talent is they leave. So I wanted to kind of dive into a couple of reasons as to why people think people within a technology team decide to leave. I'm sure there's loads of different reasons. I don't know whether anyone wants to pop up first and come up with a few that maybe they've seen within their teams or teams that they've heard about recently.
So I'm very happy to start. So I guess some of the reasons that we see is down to the actual technology itself. So whether there is a different company using a different type of technology, or it could be like a different focus. So it could be that they want to take their career in a slightly different direction. It's not something that we can necessarily support, or we've not been able to find the right position. So yeah, for us, technology and the type of technology is definitely one reason.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen similar things. I've had people leave our teams in the past and say, you know, I want to go into AI or machine learning, or I want to work on some of the new sort of emerging tech trends. I've lost people to crypto and wanting to go and do NFTs and Bitcoin and stuff like that. So that's certainly a pull. Seeing people want to do. The other one I think I've seen is sector change. I mean, obviously you can't get away from the fact that Holiday Extras is a travel business, which when you enter a pandemic and people can't travel to foreign countries, certainly that's been a reason people have given, but normally there's always secondary and third reasons as well, rather than just, I want to get out of travel and go and work in fintech or meditech or industries perceived to be more stable in the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. Just on that point there where you mentioned about sector changes and like Jen mentioned about sort of technologies that you're maybe not able to implement in your current team, do you think there's anything you can do to combat that? Or if someone says they're going to leave because of that, is that kind of the final answer, do you think?
I think everyone will have a different view on it. I think sector's very hard. I mean, part of it is to show that, you know, travel is stable to the team that are giving that reason. I think on technology changes or working in different sectors, it's showing the innovations we've got going. So if I've got engineers that are working on more established technology teams or more established systems that are more keeping the lights on or maintenance, then it's like, you know, would a jump across to this R&D team, this more skunk works that are working on bleeding edge, would that keep you here? And if it would, then how do we make that happen? And what are you going to do? And what skills do you bring to that team? And have you chatted to the product manager about the things going on in that team? And, you know, why aren't you sort of driving yourself through the organization and grabbing these chances?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would agree with Simon. We've definitely done that in the past. So look at other opportunities across the business to try and see if there is something better suited to them elsewhere, or even if they've got a piece of technology that they specifically want to work on, sort of just talking to us about it and seeing if it's something that we could implement, rather than kind of like going, oh, I'm going by. It's actually I've got this really awesome idea. What do you think about moving into this area or adopting this? We very much try to encourage those types of conversations and have that really open dialogue, so that our engineers feel empowered to come to us with exciting new innovations.
And yeah, on that kind of open dialogue, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing if let's say after trying to find a new place for someone, that it's an amicable kind of leaving in terms of whether they want to explore a new technology stack or a different area like machine learning from engineering. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and they kind of leaving on a positive note might still bring referrals to the company if they still like the company. It just isn't the direction for them personally anymore. And so kind of overall, I think the open conversation about what motivates people and what people's values are gives a really strong foundation to have open conversations about their career direction and what motivates them and how to keep them, or how to leave on good terms if you can't keep them. And they might come back in the future as the business expands as well, and that area is now available for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important, like you've both just touched on it there, but about people feeling like they're able to come to you and bring ideas. And it's something that when I speak to businesses a lot, they don't want, if they're hiring an engineer, for example, they don't want someone who comes in, works 9 to 5, put their headphones in all day, write code in the corner and then go home. They like people to be actively involved in how the product can evolve, what they can add to the process to make it better. So I think as well, in fairness to yourselves, obviously in the senior positions you're in, it's also sometimes down to the engineers to have that, you know, I'm not happy with this, it's up to me to approach it and see what I can do to better it, instead of just, you know, I wouldn't say taking the easy way out, but, you know, having a look at external opportunities instead, for sure.
I do think though that there are some engineers I've certainly worked with that maybe are not the best at putting themselves forward. Maybe that's changing as engineering becomes a bit more broader, but you definitely do have sort of shyer engineers. So I think it is a manager's responsibility to kind of be nurturing them and saying to them, look, are you happy with what you're doing? You know, what can you be doing differently? So I think not everyone is kind of confident to be driving their career forward. Some engineers I've worked with really struggle with that, and they need kind of help to step into those, you know, those things, make space for them, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think of it that way. Would you say, for example, you've got obviously engineers in your team at the minute, if you had 1 or 2 people that were more like that and needed maybe a little bit of a nudge to see how they're getting on, would you then employ that with everyone in your team, or would you sort of change it and adapt it based on how people's personalities are?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. That obviously everyone's different. It's been less of a problem at my current role because we're a startup, so you kind of self-select for being ambitious and being interested and motivated. But yeah, certainly larger organisations I work with, it is more of a problem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you found that, Simon and Jen? Is it difficult? Obviously, your businesses are quite large in terms of the tech functions. Is that something you've noticed where it's difficult to sort of notice who needs that nudge and who sort of can be left on their own to come to you?
I think what I've invested in a lot over the years, and probably I'm sure Jen will contribute to this as well, is engineering managers, is having really good people working closely with the engineers, which I know that might not be a great deal of help to Min and John, because it's kind of something that plays out in larger organisations quite often. In an organisation your size, John, the engineers are directly into you, the CTO, but as the organisation gets bigger and bigger, yeah, I can't have 70, 80 engineers into me. So having strong engineering managers who are having those one-to-ones, having those conversations, and know who is progressing at what pace and what challenges people are struggling with versus what they love and they enjoy, and are trying to guide people's career and progression. I think John picked up on a really interesting point, which is there's a high number of introverts in our industry. As much as we like extroverts as well in engineering, and it is becoming broader and we're seeing more product-focused engineers, there's still a high number of introverts, and trying to make sure it's not the person that's sort of always shouting about the work they do that gets the fast progression, that actually it's the ones that are making the biggest difference for the customer or adding the most value to the organisation, that they're recognised in their own way as well.
I have to say, I completely agree with you, Simon. The visibility thing is something that is a little bit of a bugbear for me. I think that those that do amazing work and they're super productive and they say they have that incredible impact with the customer, but are on the more introverted side and aren't going to shout about it and aren't necessarily going to really raise their visibility. I think it is up to the manager to support them in being able to get additional opportunities and to be able to help them with their career development. Like I've only been an engineering manager for 3.5 months. I'm still quite new to ASOS, but I love having the one-to-ones with my engineers. I've got so much more time as an engineering manager compared to when I was a technology manager previously, to actually have that time and have that dedicated conversation with the individuals. And if they're not raising it after within a month or two, then I am raising it with them. Like, are you happy? Are you content? What's your plan for the next year? I really like personal development plans as well. It's something that, beyond just normal objectives, I love a personal development plan because, well, from a semi-selfish reason, because it helps me understand them better and it helps me understand where they want to go. So I try, it depends on the individual. I'm not going to force that on anyone, but I will strongly encourage a personal development plan in whatever format they prefer, so that we can have an open and honest conversation about what they want in their career. And it pushes it as well. It means that we are having those conversations.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And like you say, it's difficult. You've got to sort of approach it in a way where you don't want to push anyone down a certain avenue. You've got to understand what they want. And, if they need a little bit of guidance on that journey, then that's great. But, some people have an aspiration to be, I spoke to someone earlier today who said, I want to be a CTO by the time I'm 30. It's a very clear aspiration, and you can put, probably 10, 15 steps in place as to how you can get there. If someone says, I'm quite happy what I'm doing at the moment, but I might want to do this in the future, that's when, again, you'd probably give them that kind of nudge and help them with what they need. Something we touched on there, and it's something that I think we wanted to sort of go about, is having that open door policy with your engineers, that psychological safety, making sure people know that they're valued within your team. Has anyone got any tips, tricks, ideas they've seen in the past that have worked about how you can get that across to the engineers and make sure they know? I know we've just touched on this a little bit, but anything extra that we think can add to that point?
I think that kind of always open door policy is a really tricky one to kind of do. Personal things I've done, and again, they may not work for everyone, is kind of making sure people know it from day one. So I actually got thanked earlier this week by an individual in my team who's only been with the organisation 3 months, but she called out the fact that 2 weeks into joining Holiday Extras, she had a half-hour call with me, because every engineer that joins Holiday Extras has a half-hour call with me in week 2 or week 3, and it's something I've always done and something I'm very passionate about doing, because mostly it's about understanding those individuals. I'm not actively involved in the hiring process. The engineering managers are doing that for me, and I just want to be able to connect with where have they come from, where are they planning on going, and then understand when I'm chatting to an engineering manager about that individual a few months later, I can still remember back to that conversation I had with them and picture how that fits in with their plans. So, and I've been told that by doing that, in an organization that is, slightly larger and therefore I'm more distant from the engineers, that they know that then they can ping me on Slack or drop me an email and go, have you got 10 minutes? I really need to chat to you about something important when that happens further down the road. But yeah, I guess it is a hard one to constantly remind people. I often get told, oh, but you're very busy, you're in quite a senior position, I don't want to bother you. And yet I would rather be bothered about people's career progression and development. I'd rather know that someone's struggling, and like we talked about earlier, moving them to a different team or a different part of the organisation to retain them, than have that conversation with them when they've already handed me their resignation and it's almost too late.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? Like exactly like you said, you want people to have that conversation. You'd much rather have that conversation than have that tough conversation where they say, look, I'm leaving and there's nothing you can do to keep me. So 100%, that's the best way to approach it for sure.
If I could add just on the psychological safety side of things. So one of the things that I not like to do, I should say, but I try to do, is admit when I'm wrong. I think it's really important that the engineers try stuff, that they innovate, that they push the boundaries, and that they are comfortable with things failing. And so I try really hard and to sort of be my authentic self, and to sort of go, oh, I've had one of those days, or oh, I'm sorry, I messed that up. I did something wrong there. This is how I'm going to correct it. And I think that owning of your own faults can really empower the people, and it can empower your team, and I think it can really help with that psychological safety and that support network around them, and building that culture of trust as well.
Yeah, I think that totally resonates with me. I share resonates with John as well.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, keep going mid.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say that's a big part for me as well. Like especially since in my last 2 roles, I've been building. I guess I had the privilege of building like a early stage startup tech team. So very much being able to shape the kind of culture of the wider business as well as the immediate team. Which, granted, I think is a harder thing in a larger organization if you're trying to also shift a more mature organization's culture. So certainly leading by example. So sharing my failures, like Jen mentioned, and also kind of creating and then actually interviewing for people who would be kind of people who are more comfortable in terms of arguing constructively or kind of teasing out and having that conversation and the communication skills, more so than necessarily having the best technical ability as an engineer. I think is more critical in terms of hiring to me than it is a specific technical skill, because I think as long as they've got a level of competence in terms of learning and kind of continuous learning, that they can pick up technical skills they need. But changing the way someone chooses to operate is a slightly harder task, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the thing that we really struggle with, we can do all the things that you guys have talked about, listening and almost be like a therapist to your team. But the thing that we can't fix in the startup world is some of the psychological safety. So we've had a couple of people leave because we just had, a lot of, there's less slack. We don't have a HR person. We don't have, sometimes we have later nights than I'd like. There's just a lot of stuff that in a big corporation, there's less support and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think got to select the right people, and I think sometimes we've not done a terribly amazing job at finding that. Or yeah, I'd love to hear, Min, if you've got any other ideas for how to support people more psychologically in an environment where the environment is quite fast paced and quite fast moving, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. And yeah, it's a really tough one, really.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm a firm believer that just because it's a startup, it doesn't need to be a kind of full-on 24/7. But that's almost like a wider organizational culture topic, and building that as well together while building a startup, which granted is a tricky balance to have. But yeah, in terms of, I think if people are interested in what they're building and understand that there is kind of ebbs and flows in terms of the when to push, and not kind of pushing everyone every day at that kind of 150%, but having that ebb and flow, I think it keeps people going a lot further. And if they understand how the work they're doing impacts the business. As fast-paced as a startup is, there is a level of constancy in terms of direction that can be put in by the leadership of the business, where I think where pivots do happen, but they're not kind of out of the blue, or they're not completely blindsided, as in the team isn't completely blindsided by it, and that they can see it coming because there's been an open conversation about whether something's working or not. So I think, yeah, definitely managing the ebbs and flow of the as much as possible, and also that kind of open dialogue about where something might pivot and the team are already aware of it and kind of psychologically prepared for the shift. Oh, sorry, Jamie, you're on mute.
Nightmare. How have I not got used to this by now? I've been doing this for 2 years. Everything's on Zoom. So what I was going to say, I just wanted to touch on something that you said, Min, and something that you mentioned, Jen, as well, about being able to admit when you're wrong. I think that's so important from a technical management perspective, but even from what I've seen, I'm trying to transition into more of a management position at the moment myself. It's so important because I've worked with people in the past where, even though they're the most lovely managers that you could ever ask, they still have a sort of complex about them. I hear it a lot of the time in sport where people say, people have a certain aura about them and things like that. And I think sometimes it can make people who are maybe junior engineers or people like that in your teams, you don't want them to feel kind of that you're way above them and they can't come to you and speak to you about anything. So you sort of showing that vulnerability, like you mentioned, Jen, and being able to show that, look, I'm still learning, I don't know everything. If you do something and it works, then let's all try it. There's no sort of stopping you just because I'm at this level and you're at this level. I think I'm not saying every company should operate on a flat hierarchy, because particularly in positions like yourself and in ASOS and Simon and Holiday Extras, where the team is so big, that's just impossible. But I think showing that vulnerability is a massive point. And something that you mentioned there, Min, just towards the end of your point with John, was about engineers being interested in what they're building. As a recruiter, this is probably one of the biggest parts of my role. Is sometimes I'll speak to a business and they tell me what they do, and then my first thought is, what's the best way for me to get this across to an engineer? Has anyone had issues with their current business or maybe themselves when they were more of a hands-on engineer, where you've had issues getting people to really sort of believe in and buy into the product at all?
I can probably talk a bit about that. So as you know, Jamie, you help us hire for our roles at GetHarley. So GetHarley as a skincare platform, I would say stereotypically appeals more to the female gender than it does the male gender, very stereotypically, of course. So it can be challenging to engage male engineers, which at this point is still the I guess the dominant gender in the tech workforce. There are definitely a lot who just pass over it because they would equate it to the beauty industry. So certainly getting the volume through is challenging, but there's always, and in a way it might also help with kind of finding people who communicate well and who can generate that kind of empathy with the users, despite not necessarily being a user of the product themselves, which I think we've managed to do successfully at GetHarley in terms of finding engineers who may not necessarily use the product themselves, but are interested in building good products and and so we interview for that kind of aptitude of empathizing with others and seeing others' points of view, and kind of facilitating, engaging them with understanding how the product helps our users and what the pain points for our users are, so they can take that ownership of developing a better product for the users, even if they don't necessarily feel that they would use the product themselves.
Yeah, I would say I completely agree with that. Like, I think it's a case of, you look at I guess it's the problem rather than necessarily the actual end result. I think not everyone is in ASOS is a fashion-loving 20-something. You'll be surprised to hear. But actually, the projects and the technology that we develop and that we do is really interesting. Like the problems we are solving and the problems that we are trying to solve, to be able to have that final impact on the customer. is interesting. We have interesting data as like a online only platform. We are, the actual technology itself is really interesting. So even if you're not really into fashion, we can still sort of sell the company based on the work you'll be doing rather than the actual brand itself. Although there is a lot of people that do join ASOS for the discount.
I'm sure, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's something I've come across with a couple of different businesses I've worked with over the year, but the way I always, it may take a little bit of persuasion to get someone to go for an interview sometimes, and they might say, look, I'm not really that interested in this industry in particular, but you get them to have a technical interview with someone, and like you both just mentioned, you look at the technical problems that need to be solved, and they're like, this is amazing, like this is better than any fintech I've ever worked for, or whatever it may be, where you associate them with having like the really most modern technology, the coolest stuff to work with. And sometimes, especially in those industries, been quite old, like legacy platforms that you're working on, but you go into a startup that's quite new, it's got a different idea, and that's the sort of thing you end up working on. So I think, John, I wanted to ask you on that one, because obviously what Verisart do is very new in terms of the actual industry, hasn't been around for that long at all. How have you sort of found your search for people, whether it's technical or non-technical, and how they've kind of approached what you do as a business?
I think we're almost the complete opposite end of the spectrum, in that technology is the one lever we do have to pull. So obviously, crypto is a very exciting space, and even when it's not crypto, as you just said, there are so many interesting engineering problems that surround crypto. Even if you're not doing the actual smart contracts themselves, there's a lot of stuff around that that's just super interesting. So that's the bit we found easy. The bit we can't compete on is salary. That's the really tough thing. That's true for startups generally, but because crypto is a bit of a bubble, we are finding, engineers who otherwise we'd, quite happily be able to hire, are asking for quite high salaries. So that definitely has been what we've found. So yeah, but it's a classic startup thing. We can offer very interesting technology. Every person can make major changes. So as we've already talked about, being able to pick a new technology, it's not even just a skunk works for us. It's like one of our younger engineers wants to start using technology, we talk about it, they can just start using it. So that's sort of the benefit for what we do. But yeah, it's really, for us, retention has been about salary, and we talked a bit about the startup lifestyle, and even if we do try and make the culture psychologically safe, it fundamentally is different to a big company. There are engineers out there who completely reasonably, want a bit of a less sort of a, safer career progression. We don't have that. There's no way we can't hire. There's no room to sort of grow to an engineering manager, for example, because there's only me at the moment until we grow at the next stage of our development, anyway. So yeah, it's sort of a real inverse problem to what I think some of the larger companies have faced, for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. And on one point you mentioned there about, you've got someone in the team at the moment who wants to start using a certain technology. That's a really good point, I think, because when you're working in a bigger business, I imagine it must take a lot longer, and it might not even be possible to implement a certain type of technology, a certain tool or framework or whatever it may be. Whereas obviously in the position you're in, the benefit that you've got is if someone's really keen to do something, if it's a sensible suggestion, you can just do it. Not maybe that easily, but it's a lot easier for you to do maybe than someone in a larger business where they've got hoops to jump through all the time. So that's definitely something to consider. Sorry, Sam, I don't know if you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one, because that is kind of on the opposite spectrum to John. Like you said, I can have engineers that are like, I'd really love to go and play around with, different programming language to what we're using at Holiday Extras, or different technology, or I'd love to go and play around with, serverless, and we're not using that yet at Holiday Extras. How can we do that? So then you have to, or what I've done in the past is find ways of going, well, that's great. There's reasons why I wouldn't adopt it yet. And that's around finding an application for it, confidence of it, having enough other engineers to know it, to support it if you weren't here. And so it's utilizing sort of L&D time, or if you do hack days and things like that, and going, well, how about you go and experiment with that on a hack day? And then if more engineers know about it, or you find a practical application and you can convince me, then I'm more than willing to adopt it. But I don't want to have a tech sort of landscape where I'm looking across our systems with 7 or 8 different programming languages and lots of different technologies started by engineers that once were here that we now need to maintain. Is causing me tech debt hell. So it's trying to find, again, giving people enough rope to go and play, but pushing the onus back on them, leading to what Jen was saying about PDPs, and going like, look, if you want this technology adopted, then you need to come and convince me. And that's going to be a really hard task. So like, you're going to have to go and learn skills you don't have to do that, which is going to help your progression and development, which means then more opportunities will open and you'll get promotions in the future, which then feeds into the retention piece again.
Simon, do you have kind of dedicated learning and development times? Like I know some companies will do, 20% time and that kind of thing. Like how does that work for you? Do you sort of give people time, or is it sort of a bit more?
So it's changed a lot over time, and I'll talk very briefly about it. So a long time ago, we had no L&D time. Then about a decade ago, I started something called Project Lounge Days, which was this one Friday every other week. So it was 10% time. It was a bit of a hack on FedEx days at Atlassian, or 20% days at Google. So it was taking the best of what the industry had already done and modifying it to work for holiday extras. We found that in that time, engineers went off and started learning things that were never applicable to us as an organisation or our industry. So we started curating it a bit more and saying, look, here's some problems that the organisation's never going to get time to work on or prioritise. We think there's some experimentation that could be done with quite a broad remit, but putting lines up. So you operate between these lines, not outside of them, but make those lines as far away as possible. That's actually changed in the pandemic. We took away L&D time. It was just a necessity around the way furlough was influencing the business, and we had part-time workers, etc. But as we've brought it back, we found out that actually the engineering team is saying that having one day every fortnight isn't working for them, because they want to work for 2 or 3 days consecutive on a project. So we're moving now towards hack days as a collective, 2 or 3 days together once a quarter. So instead of having one day a fortnight, we're moving to a more quarterly, have 2 to 3 days. When we are back in the offices, we'll land pizzas and beers on the final day, and you can demo the work you've done back to the organisation and get other people excited. And now what I'm really pushing towards is even you ship it, you get it actually out there for customers to start interacting with. So a 3-day hack day, you actually produce something and it's on the website.
I have to say, even at a startup, and you may be surprised at this, I've had really mixed results with those kinds of time, because you find some engineers will make something that is literally a customer-facing thing we can release, and some engineers will, do something so out there. And in a sense, it's great that they're happy and they're kind of enjoying themselves. But if you're an early-stage startup and money's quite tight, it can be a bit tricky to sort of, you do have to think about productivity a little bit. So yeah, I absolutely share that journey. That's super interesting. Thank you.
Has anyone else got anything to add in terms of the points that Simon and John have just made, or I've got another point to move on to when we're ready? So
yeah, so we do. We've got tech develops, which is normally sort of 1 day a month. It's different depending on the sort of the team you're in and the month we're in. Like it's very different around Black Friday in terms of we kind of don't really, but then we push it out to December because we need to get through that weekend first. But it's really nice and it's quite broad. So we have done sort of hackathons on that day, which is based on a business problem, so that you get people from different teams working together. And that is as much like a way to think about like the technology as it is a nice networking opportunity for the individuals, because we try to mix up the teams. So we are a large technology team, or 1,200 roughly, I think I said earlier. So getting that sort of that good networking is really, really beneficial. And then we'll have different talks from separate people outside. We've got, for the next one, we're doing something on women in tech and looking at career, specifically around women in tech. Or it could be actually, you're just going to pick something on your PDP and you've got a day to focus on it. And it's just really, really positive. But around that one day, there's all the training and everything else that you do to make sure that you stay at the top of your game for your sort of day-to-day job, or to support any promotional activities as well. So yeah, we do similar. I really like the idea of the 3-day hackathon. That sounds very fun, Simon, I have to say.
And just to add to John, so at the previous startup, I was at Nate, so every Friday was a learning day, but in terms of how it worked in a startup environment, it was more a day to learn about future technologies that we might be thinking of introducing. So it was more kind of a steady kind of increase in everyone's base knowledge of something that we know that we probably need to move to in terms of as we continue to scale, taking everyone that same learning journey. So by the time we're ready to use it in Anger and our systems, we already have like that knowledge baked into the team through just playing around with it on a Friday. And granted, having a whole day on Friday dedicated to learning is definitely a tricky productivity balance in a startup. But that's one way I've seen it work really well in terms of getting that base knowledge up as the team grows.
Yeah, makes sense. And like I say, it is quite a commitment to give people that full day, but I'm sure that it's benefited when, you know, people are 3-4 years into the business and they've learned so much more because of that. Whether they continue with the business or end up moving on eventually, I think that's something they'll always be grateful to you and your team for giving them in the first place. I think the next point I want to touch on is probably one of the most important ones, to be fair, when it comes to, you know, we're talking about retaining your best technical talent. Something I've seen in the last 18 months is just salaries just ballooning. It's pretty wild at the moment, just how much the salary expectations have gone up. I don't blame the engineers for it whatsoever. The market's going up, they want to go with it. Why wouldn't you? But I think at the moment we're seeing a lot more, you know, where people are asking for pretty much like double a salary, or they're looking for like a 60-70% increase. And then sometimes what's happening is even they're receiving a counter offer at either the same level or more. How do you go about managing people's salary expectations in the team? How often would you think a pay review is suitable to conduct? And, you know, once people get to a certain level, do you still always have that sort of conversation with them, or is it more down to them, like we mentioned earlier, to come to you and have that conversation with you?
I'll attempt to answer that question. I think it's changed, Jamie. I think you pointed out a very clear point in answering the question, which is that it's changed. And I think to some extent, we're still on the back foot and we're still adjusting to that change. I think pre-pandemic, we'd sort of do that assessment of where the team's at a long time ago annually, and then we moved to sort of 6 monthly, and we'd adjust salaries accordingly based on where people were within benchmarking ranges. And something we didn't do at the past, the organisation I'm at now, was necessarily be as transparent as we could be about those benchmarking ranges. So, you know, we buy salary data from the industry. It leads our decisions on what we should be paying our people within certain roles. But what we didn't do enough is explaining to, you know, hey Jane, or hey Jim, you're in this role. We think you're at the middle of this sort of software engineer 2 or software engineer 3, and that range starts at X and pays to Y, and here's why you're earning what you're doing. What we're trying to do right now is go more transparent and open book on that. So it's like, you know, if we've got data engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, and, you know, back-end software engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, regardless of which category you're in, that range starts here, ends there. This year, the data we've brought in and the industry data we have leads us to believe that those categories are moving up this much. And this is why we pay you what we do. Often we'll get pushback that that's still not competitive with the industry, but at least you can explain to people how you got to how you reward them. And I think in the past, I've struggled with sitting down with individuals and explaining, look, we're paying you this amount for this role because of this information. And I like the position we're now taking to go more transparent at explaining how we get to the calculations we get to. I think answering the question less directly, and I preach about this a lot when I've done public speaking and other calls like this, is that for me, reward is a very broad thing, and salary is one lever in it. It is clearly the biggest lever in it. But things we talked about, like L&D days, the environment, you mentioned remote working earlier, and people not necessarily wanting to be in an office 5 days a week. They're all many, many levers. And actually you can offset. If you can't pay industry leading rates, you can pay fairly, but not like top of the market, then the other levers are there for you to manipulate in order to make it a compelling offer to a candidate.
And just to follow up on a point you made about the kind of ranges or the levels within the organization, at what point was that kind of introduced in terms of like team size, and how has it evolved over time as well?
Yeah, so I think when we passed about a tech and product team of about 50-60 with about 30-40 engineers, then we introduced a progression framework. I'll be honest, we plagiarized a lot of what Monzo's put in the public domain around engineering progression frameworks, as a lot of people have. But we've adjusted it and tailored it to Holiday Extra's needs. So we have an internal website that talks about progression frameworks for each type of role that's in the team, and it describes what mastery and excellence and demonstrable skills look like at each level, from engineer 1 to engineer 2 to engineer 3. And engineers are encouraged to self-assess themselves in one-to-ones and with their PDP objectives around, you know, I've taken this PDP objective, it's going to get me stronger at my verbal communication skills. That's because, you know, a software engineer 3 requires better communication skills in technical planning meetings. I don't demonstrate that today. And then there's an opportunity for them to evidence that, which then leads us into making decisions about how they progress through the framework. So again, a lot of this stuff's come about in recent years. It's not something that's been in place a long time, but yeah, in answer to your question, Min, I think when you pass that, and it's not a hard and fast boundary, but a kind of 50 people, then you're definitely going to need an internal progression framework. And there's plenty of material out there shared by the top tech companies to sort of base your own sort of documentation internally off.
I have to add on that sort of that progression framework. We have a competency framework, which it was one of the things that I adopted to sort of complete as part of my platform when I first joined, and it was one of the most painful things that I have done, trying to get the right level of specifics within the competencies, and so it's actually understood. But the benefit of doing it, to be able to say, right, this is it, this is what's expected for this level, this is what's expected for this level, these are the bits where you need to work on. It's just, oh, it's worth its weight in gold. It's absolutely amazing, and it's so useful. I should have tried to steal it from someone else. I feel like, Simon, I missed a trick there for not going online and having see if I can borrow it from someone else. But yeah, for me, that's so important, and it means that you can talk to someone's progression. As you say, if you can't compete with the likes of sort of like some of the really top tech brands, or banks even have very nice wages for some people. I think if you can show progression, and you show that you're working with people, and you show that you're offering more than just a number, you are actually caring about the individual and the individual's career, I think that's really useful. One of the things that we look as well is actually the entire package. So you mentioned sort of the tech days, but it's everything else as well, I guess. Like I mentioned it, and I made probably a silly joke about it earlier, but we do get a really good discount off of ASOS's clothes, and that is part of what we offer to people, because it is a nice benefit for us. And yeah, it probably puts, you do definitely spend more money at ASOS than I have done previously, but it is good in terms of that benefit. And we have things like it's holidays, and everyone at ASOS has an extra day off in January. Most people are taking it on the 28th because they've given us a wellness day. And it's just little things like that can kind of sweeten the deal. So if you're not able to compete from just like a base salary, you're looking at the entire package, it's salary and benefits. And that's where we sort of have, I guess, a focus on, to make sure that we are offering everything rather than just a number.
Yeah, I think that's really important as well, because like you say, everyone has totally different views on what a good benefits package is. For me personally, if I was working at ASOS, I'd love the discounts because I'd save God knows how much a year. But for some people, they may not care. They may never use the platform. They may think, well, you know, you're offering me this salary, but you could offer me a slightly larger salary, just take away the discounts because I'll never use them. So it's a really difficult balance to strike. Sorry, John, I think I interrupted you there. What were you going to bring to the table?
Just that, yeah, I mean, how great progression systems are and how valuable they are, but also that it can be, I've had frustrating experiences at previous startups where we went through this kind of formal progression process, and then actually the salary choices were completely out of our hands. It came down to, well, we can't pay this person money, or the flip side, this person's threatening to leave, and we kind of need them more than they need us, and so we have to give them a salary rise regardless of where they are in the progression. So it's kind of, again, one of the challenges of startup is that there's no, you know, we can't just there's no slack to kind of take up, you know. So yeah, it's just I love them and they are great, but applying them in a startup can be challenging, let's just say.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I think what Simon mentioned before about how they measure how people fall onto the scale is really, really good, because what's so frustrating for me, and I know for developers as well, that, you know, looking to get into a role, is when, you know, someone will say they need at least 4 years experience with X, Y, and Z. They may have 3.5 years, but the company's like, no, we need 4 years experience, when we all know that someone may have 2 years experience and be miles better than someone who's got 8 years experience in the same technology but just done the same thing over and over again. So I think it's probably quite a difficult balance to strike in terms of how you judge putting someone on which pay scale and when they're able to go. But I think what Simon mentioned before about how they actually conduct themselves in like technical meetings and things like that, what they've, you know, conducted into the code base and things is a really good way of looking at it, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, no, go on, John.
Sorry, but I think, was it Jen who said this, that you know, the personal touch, that's the bit that adds value, even if you're going through these progression systems and perhaps they don't work out in a startup, but the fact that you're having it with that person, I think that bit was really successful. But go
I was going to make that exact point. I was going to say, even if you haven't reached that threshold, that virtual line I put in place earlier around the 50 people, that still doesn't stop you having those one-to-one conversations and having the people interactions that a larger organization would have, even if you don't have such sort of weighty documentation or frameworks backing it up. You can still have that personal touch point and understand where each individual is and at what pace they're progressing and the speed of movement. I also wanted to pick up on a point Jen made, an excellent point earlier about when you can explain people progressing through those levels, because actually you could be in a position where, you know, company down the road wants to offer somebody a certain amount to join and you're offering a little bit less, but you can demonstrate that over a period of 2 or 3 years, someone will progress faster in your organization and therefore the net earning potential further down the road is greater. So, you know, you might come in and take a lower starting salary, but your earning potential is far greater in the long run. And actually, we think in this team or this organisation, you'll progress quicker because of the supporting team around it. I think that can be a really powerful part in the offer and the package.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think one thing that's really important now, and it links back to what we were saying before about having that open door policy, making sure you understand what people's personal and professional goals are. Like you mentioned there, Simon, you know, you may be able to earn more with us in 3 years than you would with another business in 1 year. But for some people, they may have a goal where they want to, I don't know, maybe move abroad next year or buy a home in the next year, and they need that sort of instant relief. Whereas you may have other people who are quite comfortable in their financial situation, but they're looking for a bit of a bump. And like you say, they can take that extra bit of time to get to that level, and they're more than happy to wait and work with you to get to that point. So I think it all sort of interlinks, doesn't it, in sort of making sure everyone feels comfortable in making sure they know they can speak to you about anything, whether that's inside, outside of work, and eventually it all links together anyway. Sorry, John.
Jamie, do you think that the salary thing will be a blip, or is this the new world order, or, you know, will it settle down in a few months?
It's $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah.
If I knew the answer, I'd be recording this on a beach in the Bahamas, I promise you. I can only go from who I speak to, what I see in the market. I think it's very peak right now. I don't think it'll go much higher than this. I don't think it can really. This is something that we kind of saw coming when everyone started going more remote. The reason being is that it just wasn't feasible that companies initially, you know, were based in London, were paying London salaries, and then you'd find that, let's just say, for example, someone in the northeast of England was a senior engineer on 50k. If they were based in London, they'd be on 75, 80k. It just wasn't feasible that could stay the same forever. It was always going to be a case where that person from Newcastle was going to say, look, I'm doing exactly the same job as X, Y, and Z in London, so you need to pay me the same. I think it's just that catching up, as well as obviously the fact that with Brexit coming in and everything like that in the UK, that there's just less and less people coming into the country to do the work. But I think it's all been a bit of a culmination of COVID, Brexit, and that happening as well. I can't see it going much higher, but I'll be honest, I don't see it changing for another little while. I think it's probably here to stay, unfortunately. But hopefully that reflects in everyone's salaries as well. But like I said, I just don't see it changing, for a little while at least. To be honest, I've covered most of the points that I had initially that I wanted to bring up. But has anyone else got anything that they feel like we've missed, or anything else that we need to bring up?
There was one thing that I wanted to, I guess, just explore a bit more. One of the things that is important to me, but is also important to sort of ASOS and the wider strategy, is around sort of DEI. So we really do focus quite a lot on diversity and that culture specifically. So I am so lucky in my team, we are 47% female. I'm like, that is amazing and it's wonderful. And if I'm honest, it's probably one of the things that it's highly likely gonna make sure I stay at ASOS for like a nice long time, because I like of that culture that I've got available to me. And it's also all of the additional things, like I mentioned with Women in Tech, we've also got a disability network, and we've got an LGBTQ plus network. It's all of these extra things where people can get engaged with, that I think is that added bonus. Some people are not going to care, but for other people, it's going to be at potentially the heart of staying in a company. So I'm just wondering if that's just me because I'm really interested in it and I like to shout about it to my engineers and whoever will listen, or if that's kind of everyone sort of noticing that that is another thing that potentially will keep people within a certain company.
I'm seeing similar to yourself. So it's a subject I'm massively passionate about. I know it seems odd being a sort of white middle-aged male in tech, but I was actually quite clear when Jamie reached out that one of the exciting things about being on a panel like this today was the fact that it was a more fair gender split on the panel and a more fair age diversity split on the panel. Some of us are slightly older, some of you are slightly younger, etc. And that was really important to me. And diversity inclusion is a massive talking point, both for myself, with my team, with my engineering managers, but actually at a board level with our leadership team. And it's not about ticking boxes either and doing it to achieve a certain goal. It's actually about genuinely caring about it and doing it. The thing I find hardest about it is we have those communities. And again, I feel not sorry, but again, there's something that come in when you reach a certain size and scale that maybe Min and John don't have yet, where yeah, we have an LGBT community, we have women in tech communities, and they meet, you know, informally on a monthly basis, and they share ideas. We had an excellent external speaker come in a while ago and talk about female menopause, and something where they wanted a male audience as well as a female audience, and I attended and learned a lot from it that's going to help me personally at home with, you know, my relationships with my wife, etc. So it's a really powerful thing to be able to provide that, and I think that is a massive benefit to an organisation. But I still wrestle sort of regularly, weekly, with how we actually fix this problem in tech at the grassroots level, because I don't think, you know, even if I hired 50% female engineers as well as male engineers, which I don't have, I wish I had, that's not going to fix the problem. It's almost, how can I get out of my organisation and actually fix it at an education level? You know, with a couple of children at school, we're still not doing the right things at the schooling grassroots level to actually get this industry to where it needs to be.
That outreach bit, I think, is really, really important, and it's, yeah, I think that's something that we are doing. We were supposed to have a school in before Christmas, but unfortunately COVID got in the way and we had to cancel it. But yeah, actually getting that out and getting an influence onto people, so you can start to redress, apologies, I've been talking all day, those imbalances. I mean, we are super lucky that we are 50-50 basically, but I still see 70-80% CVs are from men, and it's just, it has been kind of more of a luck thing that we've got to this point, rather than a sort of we have done anything specific to really drive it. I think it's just, I also feel like it helps that we're ASOS, and
I was just about to say that. I was just about to bring that point up just to play devil's advocate. Do you think it's anything to do with that? And again, I'm being massively stereotypical here, but you mentioned it yourself before that, you know, women are probably more likely to have an interest in that particular sort of platform. Do you think that's a reason for it, or do you think it's more down to the sort of proactive approach you've taken, like you say, with women in tech and everything like that being involved in the business?
I think it has to be a bit of both. I think there is that thing of like Min was saying, like skincare. Yeah, I'd probably be more interested in going into a skincare company than I would potentially a bank, because that wouldn't be my preference. But I think there's also you can be more proactive with it as well. So we do a lot in terms of women in tech. We do a lot on LinkedIn. We try and like get people out there so that you're at least seen, and I think that's really important, because you're sort of showing in a way the ASOS brand and what can be done. Min, I don't know if you want to add to this from the skincare side of things.
Yeah, I was going to say, GetHarley has the opposite problem in that initially it attracted mostly women, then it's kind of rebalancing and introducing more diversity from that point of view to the business as well. But I think generally in a larger company, like I would say I've worked in a larger company, I definitely appreciated all the different networks, and it certainly helped with I think keeping me personally anecdotally in a larger company for perhaps longer than kind of sensible in terms of compensation and those kind of aspects. So personally, I think it's made a difference. I think the impact you can have as a larger company with more capacity and money to kind of have those outreach programs, and it's not even necessarily grassroots, but also like, let's say, people coming back from maternity or being out out of work for a bit, just having programs to help reintroduce like internships for people coming back to the workforce. I think that could be a really powerful thing.
Yeah, that's not even something I'd considered, in all fairness. That's a really good point. It's just something I'm not quite at the stage yet where I need to consider things like that. But it's, again, this is why it's so important to be able to personalize certain areas of your retention schemes to make sure that everyone feels a part of it. Doesn't matter what situation someone's in there, they can come to you, they can have that conversation, and you want to keep them in the business ultimately. So yeah. Perfect. Has anyone else got any other points to raise? I'm just conscious of time. I know you're all very busy, and I know we've all had sort of things going on before this. But is there any other points that anybody else wanted to raise before we wrap up?
There was one more bit I was going to cover. Sorry, there's one more bit I was going to cover that Min picked up earlier. Sorry, it's so important. I wrote it down as a note, which is almost as we spent the evening chatting about retention. And I know, again, before the call, we talked to Jamie about, why would someone in your industry help us have a conversation about retention when you're focused heavily on recruitment? But Min made an excellent point about hiring for culture and sort of approach rather than hiring necessarily for tech skills. And it does feel like the hiring process and the getting people in is almost as important as any other aspect we've talked about this evening to retention, because if you get the right people in that are culturally aligned to the organisation and are bought into the mission, and there's honesty throughout the hiring process and people get what they're going to be working on, then chances are they'll stick with the organisation for a number of years before they think about that change. Whereas if you hire badly and someone comes in and a few months in, they're like, this isn't what I signed up for, then you've almost got an attrition problem straight away. And then you're constantly, it was your own doing. People aren't leaving because they've decided to leave. They've leave because you hired badly and you didn't hire to your culture and hire to your mission, your principles.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's a big part of, and in the startup, I'm able to shape a lot more of the hiring and alignment on that. So that's a big part for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, again, one of the benefits that I'm sure you've seen, Min and John, as well, when you're hiring, is that you can be a lot more adaptable. We mentioned it before about technologies, but I'm sure it's the same in terms of interview processes and things like that. You don't necessarily have as rigid a process that you've done for years and years. It's a lot easier to, I imagine, change that for sure. Perfect. Well, I just wanted to obviously thank everyone for coming. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think we've brought a lot of different points to the table, lots of different things that I never even thought of that I'm glad people in your position were able to inform me about and teach me about. So I hope you've all found it useful. Like I say, thank you a lot for your time, because I know you've got a lot going on. You're engineering leaders, and this is just a small part of your day. But I've really enjoyed the chat, and hopefully we can do something again soon.
Thanks a lot, Jamie, for raising, and thank you, all fellow joiners.
Really nice chatting with all of you.
Thanks very much.
Speak to you all soon.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.